Hello, and welcome to the March 20th, 2019 edition of Shrewsbury Matters, a monthly show that presents a different perspective on the town's politics and problems. My name is John Lukács. Today's show is about the presentations and discussion that took place at the Finance Committee's March 16th public hearing on the fiscal year 2020 school and municipal department budgets. If people want to see the budget documents or watch the hearings, they can do so by going to the homepage of the town's website and click on the news item titled FY20 Budget Hearing Process. But I suggest you do it quickly because for some reason important news such as this are usually dropped from the homepage after a few days, after which it becomes very difficult to find where they are located on the town's website. At this hearing, I raised several serious issues with the budget documents, but as usual, town and school officials either did not address those issues or their attempts at answering them failed. So let's start with the school budget. First, a couple of points, quick points. First, the discrepancy between school officials' total school budget recommendation and the budget number in the town manager's budget. What I mean by that is that the town manager's budget package on page 113 shows a 2020 school department budget as $66,137,000. That's what the town manager is showing as the school department, school committee's recommended school budget. And that's only $113,000 less than the town manager's recommended school budget of $66,250,000. And so based on these numbers, it would appear that for the first time in a long time, the town manager was essentially able to fully fund the school department's budget request so early in the budget process. But of course, that information is wrong. The superintendent's school budget package, dated February 13th, was for $67,080,000. So the town manager's recommended school budget is really almost $1 million less than the school department's budget request. How do these errors occur? Did the town manager not have the school department's recommended budget before he put up his numbers? If he didn't have the numbers, then he should not have put that information on his in his budget package. He should have said the number had not been determined yet. Or he should have at least acknowledged that fact at the beginning of his presentation on his budget. And this is just one example of problems with the changes that have been made to the town manager's budget package over the last 2 years, which include adding extraneous information that doesn't add to the discussion on the budget, such as several pages on the selectmen's various policies, which add nothing to a person's understanding of the budget numbers themselves, or eliminating supporting exhibits and reports from some department managers that explain their budget expenses and tend to justify why they need increases or whatever. It makes me wonder, with all these problems, if these changes to the town manager's budget that have been going on the last couple of years aren't a deliberate attempt to discourage people from actually studying the town manager's budget package. The second issue with the school budget package is that, unlike in prior years, the school budget package no longer included detailed multi-year historical data on school department staffing levels. In other words, school department headcount reports for several years. School department salaries, as even the school department will admit, make up over 80% of the total school budget. So managing year-to-year headcount changes should be a major topic every year. But evidently that's not considered important by the Finance Committee, even though it should be, or for that matter by the selectmen. Neither one of them have made an issue of asking for that information to be provided every year. And that information, is important. How can the Finance Committee say it is doing even an adequate job reviewing the school budget if it does not have and does not even ask for key reports like historical staffing levels over the last 10 years, when staffing is over 80% of the costs in the school budget? It's beyond me how little attention is paid to something so important. Now, let's get to the third and the most important problem that I raised at the budget hearings, and that is that the school budget continues to be the way there's a problem with using the school budget to continue to show the funding that the school department gets. In other words, the school budget is only one part of total spending on the school systems. It's the largest part, but by no means is it all of it. The town manager's exhibits say that the reported school budget is only slightly more than 50% of the total town budget. And in the past, almost all of the documents in the school budget package and all of the discussion about the school system's financial status was solely on the school budget. This focus just on the school budget allows school officials to argue that residents aren't supporting the school system adequately, and that's false. The problem is that this 50% number doesn't include tens of millions of dollars of spending on behalf of the schools that is not funded by the school budget. During the March 16th school department presentation to the Finance Committee, one of the school committee members finally acknowledged what I have been pointing out for years, this particular issue. He briefly discussed total school funding, but even then, he still did not correctly provide the total funding spending that supports Shrewsbury's school system. He said the total, and I forget which year it was, whether it was fiscal year 18 or fiscal year 19, was around $90 million, which is still, like I said, compared to the $67 million they're quoting for next year, is much larger. But whether it's 2018 or 2019 number he used, the fact is that the fiscal year 2018 total was $96 million, and the fiscal year 2019 estimate is $99 million, and the expected fiscal year 2020 number total is over $100 million. And you don't have to take my word for it, because these totals can be found in the school department's own fiscal year 2020 school budget package. Page number 23, there is an exhibit titled Fiscal Summary, All Funds. So those numbers come right off of their own exhibit, and yet he underestimated that, reported that number as lower than what his own exhibit shows. So even while finally discussing total school funding, this school committee member continues to understate this reported total funding by several millions. So where does all this additional school funding come from? Well, in addition to annual special revenues, and by those special revenues, again referring to that page 23 of the budget package, those special revenue funds include federal grants, state grants, circuit breaker, private grants and gifts, school choice, athletics, school lunch, and some other minor amounts. So in addition to those, which together totaled about $11 million in fiscal year 2018, expenditures by other town departments in support of the schools totaled over $23 million in fiscal year 2018. And that's how they came up with the total the grand total all funding for the school system of $96.7 million. So the total of that 11 million and the total of that 23 million, I should say, is spending by other town departments that directly benefit the schools. So they are paid for out of property taxes, but they are not counted as part of the school budget. If total school spending is considered, that is, school budget plus special revenues plus town expenditures, then total school spending represents 75 to 80% of the town's total operating budget, not 50%. Why isn't total spending presented properly? Because if it were, school officials would not be able to criticize residents for not supporting the school system adequately, when the school system already receives such a high percentage of the town's available resources. So, why is that total school spending data critical? It's critical because they are the real numbers from which the state calculates per pupil expenditures. Yet the school department never talks about these numbers. Again, they don't, because it would make it obvious that total school spending in Shrewsbury is much, much more than the slightly more than the 50% of the total town budget that the school department uses when it claims that Shrewsbury spends too little on education. And even this expected $100 million amount of total school spending in fiscal year 2020 is understated. Several years ago, I pointed out that some spending by town departments on behalf of the schools was not being included in the school department's total spending number. The prior town manager finally agreed to study this problem, and he even agreed that it was likely that there was at least $1 million in underreported spending. But then when he agreed to do an analysis and a study, his resulting report failed to address several issues. For example, he simply assumed that all reporting coming out of the town's automated systems were accurately allocating other department spending to the school departments without testing the underlying data for accuracy. How you can do an analysis and verify the accuracy of a data in a report without looking at the source data is meaningless. At the same time, he also failed to explain why none of the annual costs for benefits that the town receives from Selco for its MIS network and services is allocated to the school department, which benefits greatly from them. In the town manager's fiscal year 2018 budget book on page 225, the town manager reported a total MIS support budget of $747,000, and in other years, the MIS manager had reported that they billed the town, I believe it was at least $600,000 each year for the support that they gave to the other town departments. But almost none of that is allocated to the school department, and yet the school department, probably the biggest consumer of Selco services to the town. I mean, think about all the number of buildings in town, and most of them are school buildings. So why isn't most of those costs allocated to the school department? So let's go on to page 2. In addition, every year, Selco states in its section of the town's annual report that it provides over $1 million each year in other services to the town, some of which could also and should also be allocated to the school department. These Selco benefits to the town are very unusual. Only a few other towns in Massachusetts have these kinds of benefits from their electric and their cable companies. All other towns and school systems must pay and must report the much higher commercial costs for their cable and internet services. The third problem with in this situation is that the prior town manager failed to confirm that there are in fact significant indirect costs incurred by other town departments on behalf of the schools, such as a portion of the pension and health care costs of town employees who perform things like school maintenance and custodial services, which cannot be charged to the schools. The reason is that this is important is that in many other school districts, these maintenance and custodial employees are within the school department. So those school departments can include those other pension and health care costs of those employees in their total school spending account, but Shrewsbury cannot. So that certainly will tend to these other towns get the benefit of being able to report those higher spending levels, which means their total school spending is higher than it otherwise would be if we were making direct comparisons, Shrewsbury to those towns. And so this is important when per pupil spending comparisons are made with other towns, because Shrewsbury spending actually looks worse than it actually is. So, just to go back. So this $23 million in additional spending by other town departments, it's an important number. Now, when I brought this up at the town meeting, not the town meeting, the Finance Committee's public hearing, school officials said, well, you know, all this school spending, spending on behalf of, by other departments on behalf of the school system is audited by an outside auditor. No, they're not. An outside auditor spends a very short time, I believe it's probably less than a week of actual review time, reviewing the numbers and only looking for certain issues. That is not an audit. An audit includes testing the accuracy of reported numbers by testing the data back to their sources and ensuring that all data of that type has been reported accurately and completely on those reports. An audit of town expenditures in support of the schools would take weeks, not days, to ensure that all costs incurred on behalf of the schools, were accurately reported and captured. So then the Finance Committee member, Sigilnik, said he spent 2 hours with a school official going over these numbers. Please, 2 hours. If an auditor can't really do a thorough review and audit of the numbers in the course of a week, how do you expect a Finance Committee member to sit down with a school employee and go over the numbers in 2 hours and say, yep, everything is okay, it's fine? I mean, it's no way. And oh, by the way, if he really felt that his review was conclusive in some respects, why didn't he summarize his review and send a public report to the Finance Committee where other people could look at it and see whether it was valid or not? And the answer is because his review was trivial and in no way could ensure the accuracy of reported costs. He also said that underreporting $1 million, even underreporting $1 million of total school spending would be a trivial amount, not worth collecting the cost of collecting the data. And you know, if it was just $1 million, I would probably agree with him, but I know it's more. I believe that there could be over $3 million in underreported spending, and that indeed is significant, and I'll show later on why it is particularly important, and not just for the per pupil spending calculation. Then Selectman DiPaolo had to weigh in on this question. He said that the state was, quote, satisfied with the town's reported school spending numbers. But that also is irrelevant. What's important is to remember is that the state does not audit school spending reports from towns, except in rare circumstances. The state does not even review a town's school spending reports unless there are major changes from prior years. The state just enters every town's school spending numbers in its program, calculates every town's per pupil expenditures, which are then used not only for comparison to other towns, but this is important and probably more important, they use it in determining whether a town's total school spending is sufficient to result in a higher level of state aid for that town's schools. And so let me do this. Let me go to page 26 of the school department budget package. That shows a chart which says fiscal year 20, chapter 70, determination of city and town total required distribution. And let me read from that. It says the following chart shows the final fiscal year 19 town total required contribution in chapter 70 education aid. The minimum required contribution is the dollar amount and percent of the foundation budget that must be funded locally. As one can see from the yellow highlights, Shrewsbury's target share is 80.55%, and according to the formula, Shrewsbury is therefore 1.1 million below our required minimum distribution. Now listen carefully. As a result, We are scheduled to receive only so-called minimum aid for fiscal year 20 at $20 per student for the year as displayed. Because Shrewsbury remains below its required funding target, the only increase in state aid for fiscal year 20 is $20 per pupil. So what they're basically saying, without coming right out and saying it, is that if Shrewsbury were to, if Shrewsbury's total school funding were to increase by 1.1 million, we would now meet the threshold and probably be eligible for additional state aid for the schools in Shrewsbury. So 1 million. You know, the prior town manager and Mr. Sigelnik are willing to concede that there's probably $1 million out there. If we just come up with a total of 1.1 million in additional school funding when we report to the state, we would then become eligible for additional state aid. But nobody's interested in doing that. So anyway, the school department, the finance committee, and the selectmen have no interest in doing a thorough study of town spending on behalf of the schools in order to determine whether 1.1 million or more in school spending could be legitimately added to total spending, which means they really don't care if Shrewsbury doesn't get more school state aid. That's sad. Let me cover the fourth problem with the school department's presentation. At the finance committee's hearing, the school department gave a presentation to the finance committee, but it failed to address a key issue. One of the strategic priorities that the school department has acknowledged is very important. At least in past presentations, they said that. If you go to one of the last slides on the presentation, which I assume will be on the school website, one of the last pages is a summary of investments by strategic priority. And the next slide shows the cost of the strategic priorities listed. But neither slide included the strategic priority, which is to implement free, full-day kindergarten for all. Yet this strategic priority will be the most costly and the most impactful to Shrewsbury residents. So how can school officials have committed such a basic error in not discussing that particular strategic priority? So after their presentation, I asked school officials for the full impact of going to free, full-day kindergarten for all, both the increased costs and the reduced revenues. They could not provide it. But they have already begun the program by reducing tuition for current full-day kindergarten students. Now, I have estimated that the full cost of this program on school funding, both in terms of higher costs and reduced revenues, will be approximately $1.5 to $2 million per year. It seems that town officials don't want Shrewsbury taxpayers to know how much this unfunded mandate, which is being imposed by our own school officials, will cost the town. And again, why? Why aren't they more forthcoming with this information? So, that's enough on the school issues. Let me turn over to the discussion on the water department. The good news that was announced last Saturday was that they are going to postpone implementation of going from quarterly billing on water bills to monthly billing. They've decided postponed. I don't know if they didn't indicate a date when they would plan on doing it. But what they are doing is they're going to start reading water meters monthly across the entire town. And so they're going to be able to collect monthly consumption data from all the sections of town. So all the readings will be concurrent. Now, today, the readings, when they're read quarterly, they're read on a rolling monthly period. So 1/3 of the town the meter reading is read in January, 1/3 Another third is read in February, another third is read in March. And the problem with that is that you can't use those meter readings to try to zoom down into various sections of town to find out where the unaccounted water is where most of the unaccounted water problem is coming from. So, but the problem here is that changing the water reading schedule in order to help identify sections of town with the most unaccounted water should have been the first and most important measure that should have been implemented when unaccounted water became a major issue over 15 years ago. But what did the town's water commissioners, the selectmen, do to address this unaccounted water problem? Well, first they did nothing. Nothing until 2010. Then they finally took action. But what did they do? They got town meeting to approve over $2 million to replace all the water meters in town. They did this despite having no evidence that replacing all the water meters would substantially reduce unaccounted water. They just hoped for the best. Well, most of the water meters were replaced, some more than once, and no significant reduction in unaccounted water was realized. When I pointed this out at the Finance Committee hearing and indicated that water meter replacement may have been a waste of money, Selectman DiPaolo again felt compelled to defend their position. He said that all water meters had not yet been replaced, so that it was still possible that a significant reduction in unaccounted water would be realized once all water meters were replaced. But his statement is just another example of the Selectmen's poor management of the water system. Think about it. Funds for water meter replacement were available starting in 2011, and yet all water meters have still not been replaced 8 years later? How incompetent is that? And by the way, I believe that it was 2016, the town brought in a water consultant to study this issue. He was told at that time that all water meters, it's in his report, he was told that all water meters would have been replaced by the end of 2016. But at least according to DiPaolo, all water meters have not yet been replaced. Oh, by the way, the consultant also recommended going to monthly water meter readings in order to identify major sources of unaccounted water. And now, 3 years later, the selectmen are only now doing the most important thing needed to identify the causes of unaccounted water. And that's over 15 years after they should have taken that action to begin with. So it's amazing. So now, I just want to make one other point about this. And I understand the head of the water department will be leaving soon. I hope the selectmen aren't trying to make him a scapegoat for their poor management. It was the selectmen who decided not to go to monthly water meter readings 15 years ago. It was the selectmen who decided that it was more important to replace all water meters 8 years ago. And it was the selectmen who ignored the water consultant's recommendation to go to monthly water readings, 3 years ago. So let's be sure to place the blame for the unaccounted water problem, as well as the dirty water problem and the unfair water rates, where it really lies, with the selectmen. So, with that, I think there's a lot of problems, a lot of issues to deal with, a lot of poor management going on, a lot of bad reporting, incomplete reporting, and they need to fix it. With that, I'll say that's it for today's show. Thanks for watching. See you all next month.